Hey everybody, welcome, welcome to today's Kingdom Thoughts with Mark and Daniel. I'm Daniel.
Yeah.
This is my pal, my buddy over here, Mark, and and
Hey.
we might be a little goofy today. It's just been one of those days, and so
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, I am the author of the book Who Let the Joy Out. So it's like if you can't if you can only just talk about joy and not experience it, that's a pretty sad thing, right?
Oh, for sure. I know. Oh, you've definitely helped me a couple times, kind of bring some context to that for me, but.
Just liven up. Come on. Yeah. Come on.
Just liven up.
Goofy.
Yeah. So actually, Mark, so I think today, as we were talking before the show, we want to talk about identity and some sonship, some of those. And so, where do you think we should start with that? I mean, we talk about Abraham and
Yep.
the promise.
Well, I think it's a subject that, from a kingdom perspective, it's like the never-ending story. Like there's just continues to be revelation and revelation and revelation. I think it's partly because the kingdom is so multidimensional, don't you think? Is that you discover some more. It's like the conversation that you just keep having and keep having and keep having and keep going on. So we can talk about different aspects of identity, for instance. But I think it's really a fundamental. It's a foundational.
That's what I was going to say.
I think it's foundational. I think it's a foundational understanding, because if you have an incorrect understanding, if your identity is established in something else, like for instance, if there's a lot of people, I think, in this case where your identity, your worth, is tied to what you do. What happens if you can't do anything? What if the industry that you're working in is shut down, or like in this whole COVID thing? I was thinking about this morning, and it's like I can't travel. And I've had so much sense of achievement come out of traveling. Being in different places, new places, seeing people, ministered to, connect with these people, make new connections, all of those sorts of things. I can't do it. And so I've been through some times where this year it's like you've helped me through it.
I think a lot of us have been through that this year. It's kind of like a defining year where I think it's really redefined what we're doing in our life.
Yeah. So I think it is about discovering, new aspects. And I use this word dimension because I think it's such a kingdom word, is that there's different dimensions. I would read in, in Revelation there where it says that the elders, they're just saying holy, holy. And I used to think that would have to be the most boring job in all of eternity, just to be, and because eternity is a long time. So, if you're there just saying holy, holy, holy. But then I had this revelation one day that they weren't just saying it because it was a mantra or it was just something. It's actually an exclamation. It's like, holy. It's because they saw another aspect of God. They saw another perspective of Him. And so, when we are understanding more about identity, I mean, you're talking about the whole thing from Abraham. Well, let's just go there.
So you're talking about the Galatians?
Yeah, from Galatians.
Yeah. So Galatians 3:29 says, it's Passion Translation. It says, "And since you've been united to Jesus the Messiah, you are now Abraham's child and inherit all the promises of the kingdom realm."
All the promises
of the kingdom realm.
Mm.
We could go on and on for that for a long time. I mean, I can think of some, promises of it, right? I mean, we've been promised that there's a promise of redemption. There's a promise of grace. There's a promise oh man, I'm sitting here, I'm trying to think of all of them. They're rolling all in my head. But there's so many promises that we find in the Bible. But, with Abraham, I was actually going over that today. Let me pull up my notes here now that I'm thinking about it. And there was Abraham was promised the promised land, which, we would say it's great prosperity. So he was promised great prosperity. He was promised a kingdom almost, that's really what we're looking at is that he was promised a land. It said that many nations would come out of him. That there would be these nations that he would be birthed out of him. So he was promised that. He was promised a descendant, which we're really ultimately, I think we're talking about Jesus there. The more I look into that, the more I understand that he was promised a son, but the son was the seed of the lineage of Jesus. It was really that he was promised the last son that was Jesus, the Son of God. That would be in his lineage. And then the promise of blessing and redemption and justification. Those are actual, like if we're talking about that we inherit the promises of Abraham, I think that's just where we can start, is in those areas.
I think that, when we talk about the Abrahamic blessing, for instance, that really is summed up. It's blessed to be a blessing. Abraham was blessed, and the more that he became the blessing, the more that the blessing flowed into him or onto him or into his life. It's typically, like people have the saying, if God can get it through you, he'll get it to you. And I think that there's never ending these promises of the kingdom. I don't think that. I think that the more that you define it, the more that you find that there's more. Because that's the nature of heaven. Nature of the heaven is abounding. It's abundance. It's the Father wants us to be overwhelmed with his goodness. Right? Overwhelmed with peace, overwhelmed with hope, overwhelmed with faith. That's what we're made for. Right? That's why we struggle so much when we're overwhelmed with negative stuff. We can't cope with it. We find it difficulty. That's why our bodies don't handle sickness, because we're not made for that.
Yeah.
We are made for all the promises of the kingdom realm.
Yeah.
That's what we're made for. That's what we can cope with. We can handle those sorts of things. We're not made for hell. That's why people struggle when they are, experiencing, or they're outside of the kingdom. People honestly struggle. They don't know what they're struggling with, but they struggle with being separated from God. They struggle with being separated from the community of other people. They struggle with those things. That's why they try all sorts of things to fill that gap. Right? That's why, we are all made for boundaries. We're made for boundaries. We're made for living a life like that.
So I think you're kind of talking a little bit like boundaries. We could talk about law a little bit in that. Identity and how that reflects. Oh yeah, I see that Ben was saying hi. Hey Ben, how you doing? It's good to see you.
And Randy from Bacolod.
Yeah.
And Pastor Elaine also from Bacolod. So I'm doing amazing work there in Bacolod in a place called Miracle Central.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, we've talked about it, and just in the areas of transforming lives, doing such a good thing. Great understanding of the kingdom. promises of the kingdom. Woohoo! Yeah. So great to see you people on board. So you were then talking about the law.
Oh yeah.
Tell me about it.
As we're talking about identity, we had talked before. One of the things I think that the law and identity have a lot to do with one another. You know, the the fact that there goes there's my wife.
I see your wife there. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, babe. Yeah, she like got me confused, and I was like, look at anyway. So yeah, I think that the reason that we're seeing the law being challenged by the world around us right now is actually because of identity. Because you're right. So identity was made to have limitations, made to have boundaries, like you were saying. And so the thing is if we can't decide who we are, so much in the world today, they're saying, what do you identify as? What color or what gender or all these things do you identify as? And people are saying, I don't even know who I am. I don't know if I'm this person. I don't know if I'm that person. Who do I want to be? And so when we have law, it puts us on either side of that. We have to decide whether we're this person who will be on this side of the law, or we're this person who will be on this side of the law. And of course, I'm not necessarily even talking about natural. I'm talking about God's law. We're talking about the law of the kingdom.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I say a lot is that I don't think that we're made to serve the law. I think the law is made to serve us.
Yeah.
And I think that when you are mastered by law or judgment or criticism or time or money or all of these sorts of things, you've placed yourself that you are serving those things. Right?
Yeah.
And so you can...
Go ahead, Mark.
Sorry. So we got a bit of a delay there. I think that what happens is that when you become, when you serve law, you really become judgmental and legalistic, rather than realize that's the platform that you operate from. It's meant to serve. Yeah. So.
Well, I think we're talking, it's all these structures, right? I think that in the kingdom realm, it's all about structure. So we have the structure of law, we have the structure of money, we have all these structures, and we either become servant to the structure, or the structure becomes servant to us. Exactly what you're talking about. And you're talking about money. I actually I got a question for you. And in one of our past conversations, we were talking about how Jews, how they're good with money. They have an entrepreneurial. They really identify as entrepreneurial people. As kingdom people. We know. They subdue and they take dominion over the areas they're in, specifically in the market realm. And one of the comments you made was that the reason they did that was because they believed in the Abrahamic promise. And so can you explain a little bit of how does that play into their identity of that?
Well, it's really the same with Muslim nations as well. Is that they acknowledge that they are descended from Abraham. Now, Abraham, of course, this Abrahamic blessing was upon him, right? Well, this blessing that we call the Abrahamic blessing, it was God saying, listen, Abraham, I'm going to bless you. I am going to make you the father of many nations. And we know how he battled through that. It was many, many years before he saw the realization of it. But he was a father of hope. He was strong in the area of hope. And so he obtained for his descendants a huge battle was waged by him. And so not only did he get Isaac, but he got the rest of us, right? So that when you realize this is my father on this planet, this is the line that I live within, then I'm going to live out of that. I'm going to live out that of anointing. I'm going to live out of that inheritance. I'm going to live out of that.
Well, it's almost like we expect it, right? Because he made a promise, he made a covenant. We know God holds his promises and his covenants. So
Yep.
if I'm in that bloodline, it said that he would bless all the nations that came from him, and I'm obviously
Yep.
one of those. So I would
Yep.
expect that blessing to be upon my life.
So what's the activator of that? Well, the activator of that, I think, is faith. And faith is a part of expectancy, or expectancy is a part of that which hope. Hope is all mixed into that. So faith is the substance of things hoped for.
Yeah.
So that when I have a belief, when I have a belief, I'm a descendant of Abraham, his Abrahamic blessing, the blessing that God put on his life, flows through my life, and I'm going to live out of that. You know, that's an important thing. When you put a demand upon heaven, when you come into agreement with heaven, which is really what it is, because you come into agreement, you see the power of agreement, you see the flow of those truths, that blessing, because the blessing, we know that the sins of the father are visited through the generations. Now, if sin can do that, how much more can blessing do that? Right? Because we know that where sin abounds, grace abounds even more.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So that whilst sin, evil things can visit generations after, way down, which is, what we do is we cut off those sorts of those curses and those things that take place. But if it can visit generations afterwards, how much more can blessing?
Oh yeah, right. And I think that's the reality is so often we think there's so much evil around us, but I keep coming back to that verse where where sin abounds, grace abounds more. So it's always about more. It's saying, hey Michelle, it's always there's Randy again. Hey, what's up? So it's really the concept of wherever the the dark domain is, there's always more of the light kingdom there, but it's about stepping into that, and as you're talking about what I'm hearing, as you're talking about living from that place of understanding where blessing is, when you talk about coming into agreement with and everything, what I see is that's actually a part of the identity. So I believe that we see the blessing and everything when we actually concrete that cornerstone into our identity, right? Because it's like, I believe and I have faith for that thing. So when I do that, it gets concreted into my identity, and then I start living from my belief and my faith.
One of the unfortunate things that we see in our world today is an increase in a particular crime. And that particular crime, particularly in the West, but in other nations as well, and that's identity theft. That's where somebody assumes somebody else's name and details. It actually happened to me. I had this company call me up and say, "Listen, you owe us $11,000. What are you going to do about it?" And it was like, "What?" And so after some period of time, I tracked down the fact. I found they sent me the application form that I supposedly had made for this credit card, and then used it all up. The unfortunate thing for the person who did that was that the day that or the time that I was supposed to have made this application, I was overseas. I was out of the country.
Oh, yeah.
And so that just wrecked. But they assumed my identity. They got a few things wrong, but they assumed that. So they were stealing my identity. They were taking my identity and trying to use it to gain something for them. And so the enemy's trying to do that all of the time. That's his nature to do it, to kill, to rob, and destroy. And so if he can have us somehow trick us into believing that we're something that we aren't, right? So that we can put our identity, as we said when we started this, into what we do, or our gifting, or our calling, or into something else. If he can convince us that we're not really children of God, that we're orphans, even though we might say it in our head, but in our heart, we're still orphans.
I think also what you're talking about is that the enemy tries to convince us that God's not good. I mean, if you really think about it, that's what he's saying. I was thinking about when you're talking about that. The enemy convinces us to go for something. Back in, we have Eve, who was created in the image of God, who had the breath of God. We've talked about this before. But he comes to her and he says, don't you want to eat the apple and you'll be like a god? And really, there's a couple concepts there. One is he was telling her, well, if you eat that, you'll become something you already are, essentially, because they had a kingdom. They could multiply. I mean, they were procreators. I mean, they had it all, right? I mean, they had it, what he was telling them. But really the concept is he's telling her God's held out on you.
Mm-hmm.
Like, did you know that there's this fruit and God's telling you not to eat it because he must not be good? Like, because why would he keep this greatness of what this fruit could do for you away from you? And so it was really a selfish move on her part, but it's really about that identity thing, is that she didn't believe in the goodness of God and she didn't know who she was.
And exactly the same thing happens with Jesus.
Yeah.
A slightly different thing, like Jesus goes through the waters of baptism in the Jordan, and the Father, amongst other things, says, "This is my Son in whom I'm well pleased."
Mm-hmm.
So if we just stop just there, the Father is declaring for everyone who wants to hear and listen, this person here, Jesus here, is my Son, and I'm well pleased with him. I'm well pleased. Now, he hasn't done anything really there. He hasn't healed the sick. He hasn't fed the 5,000 or the 4,000. He hasn't walked on water. He hasn't, hasn't raised Lazarus from the dead. He hasn't done any of that yet. And the Father says, "This is my Son, and I am well pleased with him." I have a theory. That I'm going to talk to you about it now. My theory is that because the Father looks from the end of our lives, so to speak, back to the present day. That's why he says things that we don't understand, because we're looking at it from where we are today into the unknown. But he's looking from the conclusion of our time, our life, what is, back to the present day. So that when he said that about Jesus, he was looking through every single person that was going to be in Christ. He was looking at all the people who were going to come into a relationship, who were going to come into the family. He was looking at all the sons and daughters who were ever going to be coming into his family and saying, "This is my son, this is my daughter, this is my son, this is my daughter, and I am well pleased with them." And so that's an important thing to understand, that you today, if you're listening to this right now live or in the days to come, and you know that you are in the kingdom of God, that you are a son and daughter, then you can be absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, be absolutely confident that he's well pleased with you. But the interesting thing is that not long after the Father has made that declaration, now nothing happens within the kingdom without first a declaration, right? So a declaration is made. This is my son. And more than that, I'm well pleased with him. Not because he's done stuff, not because just because he is the son. He's a son. Right? So when he goes into the wilderness and he's led by the Holy Spirit into the wilderness, okay? The wilderness is not designed to be a bad place. It's designed to be a transition point from one realm to another. So sometimes you're going to feel like, you can't hear, or you're not hearing like you used to hear, or you're not getting revelation like you used to know, or it can feel like it's tough or whatever. So when you realize that that's a wilderness time, and it's time to change gears, or it's time to change seasons. And so Jesus comes into this wilderness experience in order to change from being the carpenter's son, right, to step out as the Son of Man and to display the kingdom and to display what it looks like to be a child of God on the planet. Now, the very first thing we know is that the enemy says, if you are the Son of God. See what he's doing? He's attacking identity. He's trying to convince, and it was just a waste of energy on the enemy, because it was never going to persuade Jesus. But he's just demonstrating, and Jesus is just showing us that, look, the enemy is always going to always attack your identity. And that's why when we are preparing to go into a breakthrough season or to step into a new area, we'll always get an upgrade. It won't always feel like it's an upgrade. It can sometimes feel like it's an attack on your identity, but there'll always be a point in which you are getting upgrade in your identity. And the Father will always bring us into that. Because he wants us to be able to handle what we are stepping into. See, Daniel, see how so vital identity is, and that's why we keep talking about it.
Yeah, it's a good one right there.
Well, look what Corey. I mean, Corey's just saying, what we've been talking about. So he tries to bring Jesus into performance instead of identity, or he's trying to bring into that identity. The performance actually is the big thing. He's saying, look, if you are the Son of God, then do something. Prove it.
Prove to me exactly.
You never have to prove identity.
Yeah, you simply are, because that's what he tells us. As you were talking about that, you're talking about the wilderness, that transition place, and also, I think it is about going from something into something. It's that, but also, we find that the Israelites were in the wilderness, and it was actually to let something die. So I think that can sometimes, through in the wilderness, sometimes too, it's about him letting some things die so the new can come. It says, the old things will die and the new will come. And I think, so there's in that too. Sometimes things in our identity have to die, before we can replace things. Sometimes old ways of thinking or old ways of the way we identify has to die off before we can see the new.
One of the things that has often interested me is the story of the prodigal son. I know it's called the prodigal son. I think it's probably mislabeled, really. I mean, I know he was prodigal, and what we see is the compassion, the love of the father, for the son who demands his inheritance. So even when you think about that, that's a pretty it's a pretty bad thing, really, because what he's saying is to his father, "I wish you were dead."
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, die so I can have my portion.
Yeah, so I want what I would get when you're dead now, right? So I wish you were dead so I could have my inheritance. So that's pretty. It's pretty hurtful, but it's because of his selfishness. He goes out, blows all the money, does bad stuff, really, and then comes to his senses that realizing that the servants would be better off, and he goes back to the house, go back to the home, and the father's waiting for him.
So he expects it, right?
Yeah, he's expecting, or he's longing for it. I think it's what this is what hope is. Hope is this earnest expectation. The Father is so full of hope. Now, for me, I think that all of that's wonderful, and I've told that story, and I've heard it all my life about the prodigal sons, and we talk about prodigals and praying in the prodigals and all of those sorts of things. But what I think we miss is how sad it is to watch the behavior of the older brother.
Mm-hmm.
That's the most indictment, because that's what a religious spirit will do to you.
Mm-hmm.
A religious spirit will dry you out. A religious spirit is more interested in function. It's more interested in doing it the right way, the only way. I talk about it like this way. I'm thinking, there's so many things that are meant to be lifestyle, but what the religious spirit does is it sucks out the life. It takes the life out of something, and you're just left with the style.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's form. It's about function. It's about formula.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, if you just do this, this, and this, you're going to get this. And so the older brother is so indignant, and he's even referring to that son of yours. I mean, it's his brother. He doesn't identify. He keeps it well across, because what he does is he tries to lock him into his past, his past behavior. Now, we know that past behavior can have consequences, but we know that you can be forgiven from what you've done in your past. Right? And so what we see, and Karma is so right here, and she says that religion robs you out of the relationship, and that's what the older brother did. He separated himself from that relationship, and yet the father said to him, "But you were here all of the time. You could have had a banquet every night if you wanted to, because it's all yours." But what happens is the older brother didn't see that he was a son. Now, the prodigal had been through such the depth that he realized how valuable sonship was. He knew how he had damaged it. The older brother, who had it for so long, he didn't realize what he had.
I see where you're going kind of with this. Sometimes we go into that desert place, and it's
well. I don't know whether he became so familiar with it, but I think his thinking was that he was maybe being too stingy with what he had, or maybe not even realizing, or not wanting to realize, that he could access what was his. I mean, the father said to him, the father said to him, "Look, you could have a banquet every night if you wanted to, because all of I have is yours." Right now, the son, the prodigal son, realized that, because he said, "I want my part. I want my inheritance," and he went and blew it, and he's got nothing. And he comes back, and the father puts a cloak on him, puts rings on his finger. He restored him to all that it is. And I think that we can live life not confident of who we are. And I think that is an area that the enemy tries to rob people of, the confidence of being, who you really are. And I think it must bless the Father when you behave like a son, when you realize that everything that the Father has is yours. So we come back to what Galatians said. We've inherited all. We've inherited all of the promises of the kingdom realm. Not just some, not just a little portion, not just a percentage, just because you live in this country or that country, or you're male or female, or you're little or tall or short or fat or whatever else it is. it doesn't have anything to do with it. What it has to do, I suppose, it's like, who's your daddy?
Mm-hmm.
That's what has to do about it.
Yeah, but as you're talking about, so I've been sitting here thinking about, you say, who's your daddy? I think a great example in the Bible of identity from Jesus is back when, his family goes into Jerusalem. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to remember. I think it's a Passover or something. Anyway, they go, and on their way out, they lose Jesus. And they find him sitting in the synagogue, and they say, "Hey, what are you doing? Come on!" And he says, "Do you not know I'm about my Father's business?" It's like even at that moment, he knew who he was. The identity was, he's like, "I know I'm my Father's son, and I'm about his business." Like, do you not know it? He knew more who he was than the people around him knew who he was.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I think it's a great picture if we're truly solid and we understand who we were, even when everybody around him saying, "Who do you think you are? Like, you don't belong here. Why did you run away? Come. Everybody's trying to pull him from this place he's at. And he's like, I don't care what any of you think. Do you not know that this is where I belong, sitting here in my Father's house about my Father's business?"
In understanding about identity, and we keep seeing it time and time again, how it's the very root of issues that people have. So we reflect a little bit, Daniel. I know that this has been a significant revelation for you. Understanding who you are. So what's that done for you? What's that done for you in a business realm, let alone as a father and as a husband, as a son? What is it? How has it impacted you knowing, who you are, and moving into that revelation of it anyway?
Okay, so here's some direct. I can think of a couple direct. So one, I think probably I would say the most noticeable one that I know myself has been being a father. And so I think we all go through a moment, especially when we're new parents, thinking like, am I capable of this? Are my kids are they going to believe God? Are they going to know God the way I want them to? Am I going to be a good example? There's all these questions, and it sets us up for so much failure, because we start thinking, oh, am I good enough? Or all these things. And so, this revelation that I really had is when it was the reality of realizing, like, from the moment that God gave me my first son, I identified as his father. Like God actually stamped that identity on me. I didn't. He said, "I'm giving you a child, so I call you father. I stamp you father because I'm giving you this child." And so I was struggling and failing miserably, to be honest with you, of being a good father to my children, because I wanted so bad to be it that, sometimes I saw like the things we focus on sometimes are the things we have the most problem with, just because of that. And so it really, and that was probably the biggest like clicking aha moment that I've had in identity, was when it really hit me. And I just said, God gave me this child, so I'm obviously the best father that my son can have, because I'm the only father my son could have, because God decided that. And so in that, he decided I was the best father for this child. And so it changed me. That's what it does. When you concrete that in, you say, I believe it. That's what I'm going to believe. Then all of a sudden things like your wife starts saying, what happened to you? Like, you're so good with the kids. Like you discipline them so much better. You aren't angry with them all the time, and all these things.
So can I butt in there? So do you think what you came to a realization was you stopped trying to be a good father and just was a father?
Yeah. And so it is exactly right. Well, then in business, it was the same way. So there was really, what was happening was I was second guessing myself on so much that I was putting a lot of burden on my partners in my business, because it was like, I don't know that I can do this. And so I would be putting this burden all over the place, and it really caused a lot of problems relationally, business wise, all kinds of things. And so when I finally was like, this is where I'm at and I can do this, like God put me here. This is my passion. This is what I like to do. And it was about, I started really going, like, it wasn't that the business defined me, it was that I defined the business. So I started saying the business will become like this because that's who I am. I'm a visionary, so my business needs to be visionary. I'm relational, so my business needs to be relational. And I really saw that happen. When that happened, I saw 9 out of 10 people that I talked to sell them in my business. I landed them before we ever talked about price, which I had a hard time getting customers before. But when I actually started putting passion, vision, and all that into what I was telling people about my business, they just wanted to buy. They're just like, yeah, you're it. What's the price? You're it. And so.
Well, a lot of that has to do with confidence, doesn't it? Because confidence, people catch confidence when they see somebody who's confident about who they are, and understanding who they are leads you into that confidence, where that you can be confident, not arrogant. Really the difference between confidence and arrogance has to do with thanksgiving, has to do with the humility in part of your heart. So, that's really good. That's a good, yeah. I think, for me, there were just several things, but I think it's, when I realize that who I am and can say who I am, I'm agreeing with heaven. There's a lot of thinking that people seem to have. Maybe it's not as much as it used to be. I don't know, but people seem to think that if you don't say it, then that's a humility, and that it's pride to say that I'm a son of God, I'm an apostle or a prophet or wherever else it is. I mean, if you have to tell people, right, ramming it down their throat that you are an apostle, prophet, you're probably not. But if you are able to, out of confidence, say, this is who God called. I mean, Paul would say this. He wouldn't say, I am Apostle Paul. He says, no, I am Paul, called as an apostle. This is what I'm called to do. But in understanding, when you are saying, I'm called to do this, you are talking about, this is my identity. In his case, my identity was Paul. This is what I do. And that's the important thing, is to have that in that right order. But listen, understanding who you are opens up your experience of who God has designed you to be, has called you to be. I was just reading this yesterday from Proverbs. So I was, it was in my case, it was the first. In a few other places in the world, it was yesterday too, but in your case, today is the 1st of March. I read it from Proverbs 1 in the Passion Translation, and it's just got this, whole words of wisdom. It's just talking about some things. And then verse 4, it says, these proverbs, so this what was written, this wisdom will give you great skill to teach the immature and make them wise, to give youth the understanding of their design and destiny. That's what the Father wants us to understand, is as children of God, what's our particular design and what's our particular destiny. He wants to help us to understand in our identity what we are on this earth, what is the design of our life, and what is the destiny of our life,
Mm-hmm.
right? And when you pay attention, when you are on a pursuit of understanding your identity and the different dimensions of it, you'll understand much more about the design and destiny.
Mm-hmm. You know, one thing I was thinking of is the difference between identity within the world and in kingdom. You know, in the kingdom or in God's, in the scriptures, even you could say is. I wanted to like make define those is that in the world we're told to find identity within ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, say look into yourself and find out who you are. Whereas in the kingdom, we're made to find our identity in Christ.
That's right.
It's like that. It's like I am confident because because he's my God. I'm confident because of who he made me. And that's what we're talking. As you were talking about, like so we talk about someone who's self-confident and they're full of themselves, and it's all about they like to talk about themselves. And the truth is that's because their identity is found in what he's found in what they do. And that's the problem with that is it's a house built on the sand, and that's why we have so much suicide and we have so much things in the world right now, is because when we put our identity in ourselves, it's destined to crash, and then we have nothing to stand on. We have no dignity left. We have no faith or hope or anything left, and so I think that's really the key to that, is really our identity has to be grounded in who Christ is and what he did for us, who he says we are, and he says we are redeemed. He says we are special. We're one of a kind.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much there. And so I know that, like with me, that can be some of the challenges, is realizing, confidence is found in who Christ says I am.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think it never ceases to amaze me at the brilliance of God. And, I don't even think that really fully describes just how absolutely amazingly brilliant, he is. And we see glimpses of that. If we just think about this, the Father wanted us as his children.
Mm.
He sent his son himself, as his son, to this planet because he wanted to communicate to us that the answer to every issue is always sonship.
Mm-hmm.
The answer is always a son, right? And I'm sure people will understand that I'm not talking about gender. I'm talking about position.
Mm-hmm.
And so that when we see Jesus come near to the end of his earthly life, and he's in the garden and he's praying before going to the cross, he says to the Father, I've completed the work that you've sent me to do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, right at that particular point in time, he has not completed the cross.
Yeah.
But he is saying, I've completed the work that you've sent me to do. Am I saying the cross wasn't important? I'm not saying that at all.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying it's very important, but it's not the work that he was sent for.
Mm-hmm.
What was the work that he was sent for that he's already completed?
And was to show us what it's like to be a son on the earth.
He was demonstrating what it looks like to live as a son, as a child of God.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that Jesus did. In fact, he actually said it. He says, what I've done, you will do. Oh, actually, no, you will actually do more. You'll do a lot more.
We'll do greater things, yeah.
You'll do greater things.
Or what I've done and even greater things.
So isn't it wonderful that the Father said, I'm going to adopt these people, my loved people, my much loved people. I am going to adopt them as my children. They're going to become my children. And what I'm going to do is that I'm going to show them what it looks like to be a child of mine.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that that's the key thing is that's why it's really important to understand what Jesus did and taught. Now, is Paul got some amazing things to teach? Yes, absolutely. But he's not Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus, it's really important to have an understanding of what Jesus did, how he lived on the earth, how he behaved as a son.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to say today to everybody that's listening, from that start that we started with today, that we inherit all the promises of God. It's time to discover all of the promises of God as a child of God. I want to encourage people today, don't settle with the thinking, understanding of what you know today about who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Go for the more. Ask the Holy Spirit. Ask today, what do you want to show me more about my identity? What do you want to show me today about who I am and whose I am? Well, that's a key. I believe that's a key today, to be into a place where you are asking the Holy Spirit, who's the teacher? Who's the instructor? Who's the revelator? He wants to bring to people today, right? And let him show you where you've put your identity in some other role that you play. Some other thing that may be somehow capturing you, and keeping you away from your true identity, or dimensions of your true identity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I seen this post that Corey put that really goes into what you're talking about, is things that are keeping us from understanding our identity stuff. So I mean, he uses the world systems to impose his traits on us instead of accepting our nature from the Father.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really, so often that's what we do, right? We get caught up in in this poverty that's going on around us, or we could name so many things that are going on in the world system around us: lawlessness, poverty, all these things, and we start letting those define us. We start saying, "Oh, I'll never have the kind of money I need to go on a mission trip." Oh, I'll never have this, and right, you say it starts with the declaration, and I think so often that's that's what you're talking about. Like, start paying attention, guys.
Mm-hmm.
I think people, I would just encourage people to start paying attention to their way of thinking. What are they having faith for? What are they believing? And it's not just about what you're saying; it's about what you're thinking. So we need to take some thoughts captive, and we need to start saying, "No, I am Christ. I am a son of God, and I'm not subject to the systems of the world, because I get all the promises of the kingdom realm, which are not the world system." And
yep.
So if we're going to discover the promises of the kingdom realm, we first have to get out of the systems of the world and quit saying that I'm subject to those.
Wow. Well, I think that's an excellent note to finish on, because you just said, take thoughts captive, right? Take the thoughts that are not your thoughts, or not meant to be, or are in contradiction to the kingdom, and to take new thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
To take on new thoughts about who you are and who you are today. So we want to just speak that out today. All the promises, all the promises of the kingdom are yours.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just want to bless you with that today. We want to say thank you for joining us. Just really appreciate you tuning in, whether you're listening to it live now or you'll listen to it later. This is another aspect of revelation, of identity. We see it so often today, where people, the things that they're going through, the struggles that they're going to, the basis of that is identity. And the Father is wanting to continually take us back. That's why we keep talking about it. There's at times we feel like we want to move on from this to another subject, want to prophesy or do something else, but the Father keeps saying, no, just talk about identity. Come back to identity again, because it's what it all boils down to. It's a foundational thing to come back to. And if you hear something, you've heard it for 10 times or 5 times or 20 times, I pray that something of what we've talked about today will trigger something in you that will take you into a new dimension, to a new dimension of the kingdom. So thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Daniel and I just so appreciate the comments. We've had lots of comments today from people.
Comments, guys.
Just really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for checking in. Thanks for visiting us on the live stream. And if you like what you're hearing, or even if you don't quite like what you're hearing, share it anyway. Let somebody else hear what we're talking about. Get the word out there. Subscribe. Where else it is to Insight Now. Tomorrow, Chris and Peter and myself will be back on for live Insight Now, and you'll pick up other times when Peter or Chris or myself, Daniel, and I will be here next week as well. So have a great day. Have a good rest of your day and time to embrace in a completely new way identity.
It's who you are.
That's who you are. So have a great day. Appreciate. Bye.